Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft. If you've not yet subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do that now. All right, if you are familiar with the show, you know how this works. I have just read an H.P. Lovecraft short story. I begin by giving you a synopsis of what happens in the story, and then I wrap up with sort of my thoughts and feelings about what it all means. Is it a good story? Where does it fit into the Lovecraft canon? All right, so jumping into that synopsis of The Stone Man from 1932, written by Lovecraft and Hazel Heald. A man, the narrator, and his friend have heard the story of someone in the Adirondack Mountains having found a lifelike statue of a man and a dog in a cave. And they think this might lead them to a missing sculptor named Arthur Wheeler. So they take a trip up to the Adirondacks and they ask around, and one of the locals tells them that, Wheeler had been staying in the area, been staying with a man named Mad Dan, but they think that Wheeler may have been having an affair with Rose, the wife of Mad Dan, and something bad could have happened because no one's seen them for quite some time. So they travel into the woods. They find a cave. They find a stone dog looking very, very lifelike out front. Inside, they find a man who we will later learn to be Wheeler. I think that goes without saying, so I'm going to tell you right up front. It's Wheeler, and he has been turned to stone. They're not done there. They travel to Mad Dan's cabin. There they find a woman and a man. The woman and man obviously being Mad Dan and his wife Rose. But they do find also a book, and in this book, it's written in Mad Dan's handwriting. It explains the entire thing. He basically monologues his entire evil plot. We find out that he was the member of a New England family, very much rich in witchcraft, and he has something called the Book of Ibon, which you will hear referred to in many Lovecraft stories. And he explains how, suspecting that there's an affair going on between Rose and Wheeler, he concocts a means by which to get his revenge, and that's when he stumbles across a spell or a formula, because it's mostly science, he tells us, as opposed to magic, that would allow him to turn them into stone. So he goes about concocting his plan. He orders materials from far afield and brings them in, begins testing them. He begins his test on Rose's dog, the dog found at the cave mouth, and then eventually he lures Wheeler off to the cave with the promise of showing him a new vein of stone for him to carve. And then in celebration, Wheeler guzzles down a flask of wine that had been laced with this potion that in fact does turn people to stone. So that leaves him with Rose. How to get revenge on Rose. Rose doesn't drink wine, and she seems to be suspecting him, so sort of as punishment, he locks her up in the attic. On a daily basis, he would send her up water, but also with salty food, hoping that the salty food would make her feel very, very thirsty, and even if she suspected that there was something wrong with the water, she would feel forced to drink it. But the days go by, and she's not turning to stone. He basically hears her up there every day, every night, sort of fumbling around, dragging herself around, apparently, sometimes fumbling with the locks on the windows as if she could drop herself down to the ground, which is way, way below and far too high to drop. And in this process of having waited for all these days, Mad Dan gets very, very tired one night, and he falls asleep. That is when Rose comes down, and she picks up writing in the book where he had left off, and reveals that after the first night of taking this weak potion, she suspected what was going on, that he was trying to poison her. She found herself paralyzed in half of her body, hence her dragging herself around up there. But she saved all those nights of poison, and she comes downstairs, uses a funnel down his throat, ties him to the chair, and pours it down and makes him turn to stone. However, with Wheeler dead, and having been abused all these years, and now her husband being dead, she doesn't want to live, so she takes the rest of it for herself and turns herself to stone. It's another relatively weak Lovecraft story, but it does have a few positives. First on a positive list, Rose is an abused wife who becomes the strong female character who gets her revenge. Keep in mind that this is written in 1932, and all anyone wants to talk about in terms of Lovecraft is his racism and his sexism and his chauvinism and all these things. And those are certainly real parts of who he was. However, this is another example of him working with another author, Hazel Heald, and creating, telling a story where the abusive husband does not win. The evil doer does not win. The winner is, in fact, the battered woman, and she gets her revenge. Also, sort of interesting is how Mad Dan's journal puts us inside the mind of the madman. That's sort of a rare treat. There's been various storytelling over the years that tries to make us sympathize with the bad guy. This does not do that. He is completely unrepentant in his evil. He's a jerk. He's a bad guy, and he gets what's coming to him. But along the way, we see his entire process of trying to find ways to subtly, first create his potion, but also then to how to lure these people into situations where he can enact his vengeance on them. And that's interesting. But also, that same journal is a negative in that it spills all the beans, very much in a straightforward, literal way. It robs the reader, that's me, I'm the reader, it robs us of the mystery, or very much of the mystery. And, the story is set up as narrator, he's there, his friend comes to him telling him this story of, the man in the cave and my missing friend, and then they go investigate, and then it seems like it's got more to do with the friend than the narrator, and then they pick up the book, and then it's all through the eyes of the bad guy and then his wife, but then it never goes back to either of the original two characters. And this is an all too frequent thing with Lovecraft stories, and having a story told in the relative first person, it's tough, but it's a good thing because it allows you to have more access to the main character's mind than you would otherwise get. It makes you a little bit closer to omniscience, assuming that the narrator is a reliable one. However, the bigger problem is that as he always descends into these modes of storytelling where you begin with the narrator, but then the narrator's reading something or is hearing a story from somebody else, is that it puts too much distance, I think, between the reader and the character. And one of the whole reasons for telling first-person stories is to bring you close to them and to give you that access to their mind. And then Lovecraft begins that way, and then he sort of robs us that way of that. He's on the right track, and oftentimes where being in that first person, you can watch the mystery be revealed through their eyes. However, it's a bit of a cop-out to always fall back on this idea that, here's a written down story that you can check out and explains everything. You don't have to do any of the work for yourself or for their selves either. So there is that problem. It's another one of the stories where I'm going to say is if you're not a Lovecraft completist, you might want to skip it. If you're pressed for time, you might want to skip it. It's going to take you about a half hour to read, so it's not a big time commitment. If you have that 30 minutes, maybe you want to read it, and then you can say that, I did read it. I gave it a chance. I think there's a much better story in there than is actually revealed in this publication, so take it for what you will. All right, I'll be back in a couple of days with my next review, which is of Winged Death, and I think that's also co-written with Hazel Heald. So be sure to tune in a couple of days and come see what that is all about. Until next time, keep it creepy.